I have to say that, well, let me say this. I'm Rose Frantzen, and I'm very pleased to be here at the National Portrait Gallery and showing my show. One of three artists, Rebecca Westcott and Jim Torok, and I are all part of a show called Portraiture Now Community Series. And I think well, let me just say something first. Somebody just walked in the door that I think I'm going to give you a little bit of background from me, and then I'll tell you a little bit about how I kind of came around to moving toward a project like this. Somebody came into the door just now, flew in here from Australia, and this was the person that told me, well, she actually got me to go to Australia when I was 20 years old, and I didn't know I wanted to grow up and be a painter yet. And she thought, she actually believed in me before I knew that was what I really wanted to do. And on that trip in Australia, I made a decision to become a painter, to become an oil painter. And then I feel like I have like these two brackets. And then there's Brandon Brame Fortune, who's the curator and acting director. She's curator of this show, but the acting director? Oh, you're back to just being a curator? Awesome, well, you're great. Okay. Demoted, promoted, demoted, you know, that's it. Anyway, and I feel like it's really lovely to have these two women who've bracketed the beginning and this awesome part now of my career. But Brandon is the curator that came out to Iowa and saw this show, this project that I didn't know when I started would wind up here today in the Smithsonian. I got this idea for this project. I sort of like to think about it as multiple lines converged in my life. I was 39 and I was turning 40, and it was interesting because of Tori helping me find what I wanted, like how to follow this dream when I was so young about this love of painting. I was interested in how do you eventually, after I've been doing it 20 years at that point, it was my 20th anniversary kind of painting, how do you find a way to take what you love to do to people who don't know what this thing that you're completely consumed with means, right? Like, I live in this small town in Iowa. I grew up there, moved away, came back, moved away, came back. In fact, the year that I got this idea and all these lines converged, I was living in New York City. And I found myself back in Iowa primarily because of this project. There's a lot of things I'm not going to say about how also that worked out, so I'm like, how do you in a town of 6,000 people share what you do, right? With people who aren't really oriented this way, but yet you know that they want, that maybe there's something possible, right? There's one of the lines that converged. And I knew that I'm like a painter, and I did this alla prima technique, which means I paint all in one setting, and all the paintings that are in this show, the 180, are all done in one setting. And I'm going to try to see if I can find my orientation in this conversation. I'll be really good in a few minutes, I think, maybe. It's all right? Oh, listen to you. Thanks. I paid her. She's from Iowa. But let's see. How do you? Okay, so I was like, so what I realized, all my paintings are pretty much done from life, and always I work with people posing, and my models have had this. We generally find this way of connecting, and they talk about this experience actually being really meaningful. And so I'm thinking, hey, I could do something like that as a way of sharing. I could take what I do and bring it into community. Because I was like, how do you contribute to your community? That was one of my questions. There you go, that's one. The other question I had was, Chuck and I, my husband's also an artist, we were involved with this show that was about social commentary. And it was a show for a museum that was about 30 miles away from our town. And they had sort of asked all the artists in this project, or in this show, to sort of think about some way to do social commentary on with their art. And I was like, oh, I had all these political things, and I was going all these different directions. And I'm like, okay. And I sort of kind of held that question within myself for quite a while. So that's another line. So think I got this show, and I've got this question about how do you contribute to your community. Those are 2 lines. And then the third line that happened was I was in, so you have to see that when you get an idea that's sort of big like this one, it's like a multi-month genesis, okay? And this didn't just come like, I had like all these, a whole series of questions for many months. And another question I had was, another experience that I had that I think actually contributed to this, why did it form this direction? I was painting, I had a show in Arizona, and Chuck and I drove from New York to Arizona, and I had 2 paintings that I spent 1.5 years on. And I'd like invested all this time and stuff in them. And while we were like taking a break from the show, my friend whose house we were staying at, she just gotten married, and she had a 16-year-old son. She was previously married, and I wanted to give her a wedding present. So I painted the 16-year-old son 12 by 12 in 4 hours. And he loved it. And I'm like, really? Because 16, you're just supposed to hate kind of everything, right? except for their mother, right? And I'm like, he was just like, he called all of his friends over, and they had to come look at his portrait. And I'm like, wow, man. I was just so blown away that somebody like that would really, like a kid, would love his portrait so much. I'm thinking, wow, that what's that? What's that? Like that visceral, like immediate kind of connection. And so then my friend's cousin came by, and she's like, would you paint me? Would you paint me? And she was in her 40s and thought she was in her 20s. and I painted her like really honest. And I did. I made her look like she was in her 40s, and yet she had this effervescence of a 25-year-old. I left that in there, and she loved her portrait too. And I'm like, hey man, what's that? So like think about that as another seed. So there's another line that was inside of my head, and so I'm like, okay, 3 things. There's 3 lines, and then one day, okay. Back to when I talked about those 2 paintings that took me 1.5 years each. They were done in a totally different painting technique called the Old Masters technique, where you work in layers and layers of glazing work. So like you start with a black and white drawing, and then you lay layers of paint. One you maybe do veils, and then you do veil would be just like a red coat, and then you put whites in. And so basically, it took me maybe a month, 2 months, 3 months. 18 months to do some of those paintings. And I was trained to paint like this, but I don't feel like I want to be limited in any technique, right? I wanted to try everything, and so I spent, I think, about 3 years exploring this other way. And so I'm like, man, maybe I need to like re-exercise my alla prima skills, because I had gone from painting a head in maybe 9 or 10 hours to painting a head in like 2 months. And so I was like, okay, how the heck am I going to get back to being a fast painter again? So there's another line that was inside my head. And one day I'm walking to the grocery store. 5th line. I think these are 5 lines. Like, this is how it came to me. I walked to the grocery store, and I'm like, I'm turning 40. And I have been painting a lot of models throughout my career, and a lot of the people that I always hired were in their 20s, because people in their 20s, they're looking for money to pay for college or whatever, and so I can hire them, and they're lovely and they're beautiful and exquisite and da-da-da-da. And so I was always hiring models in 20s, but I'm turning 40, and I like to use my models to kind of represent my own sort of inner journey and my own like dialogue and stuff, and I'm like, man, these young, beautiful women and men aren't really doing it for me anymore. I want to paint some, you mind if I say this in the National Portrait Gallery? I want to paint some older chicks, man. and so I'm like, where am I going to meet them? And so I'm like, thinking, I gotta get back to being to do alla prima, and I want to paint older people. I'm tired of painting all these young people. And how am I gonna do this social documentary stuff? I mean, social commentary stuff, and and I'm in the grocery store, and I'm in the checkout line, and I look straight ahead of me, and I see all these people. And I'm like, hey, what? There they are. Why don't I paint them? And I'm like, yeah. And all of a sudden, all those lines converge into one thing, all right? Yes, social commentary, democratize the portrait. Let anybody in town be painted. You don't have to do anything. You don't have to be anybody important. You get painted just because you show up. Boom, that's my social comment. Second thing, alla prima. Ooh, I'll learn how to paint again. Okay, great practice. 3, all ages, everybody, okay? I'll learn how to paint anybody, any age, blah, blah, blah. And it'll be great, okay? 4, maybe I'll be able to share some part of what I do with people who never get to have a chance to this experience, And that might be the one we should underline, because that was the part that took this project in a whole different direction than I was even able to conceive. 4, some of those young guys, maybe they'll be okay to come in, maybe they'll come in and try it, right? So I came back home, and I'm like, that's it, Chuck, I got it. I'm gonna paint everybody in town, 6,000 people. All right, and Chuck looks at me like, what? I'm like, I know, I totally know what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna do 6,000 portraits. Just think, after like about 200 or so, I'll be really, really fast. I'll be able to paint 8 a day, I know, when I was younger, I used to paint really fast, so I can do this. And so he's like, I don't know if I called my parents up, Mom, Dad, what do you think? My parents live in the same town, okay? And I actually started a gallery with them in 1991. And so I call my dad up, and I say, Dad, I'm going to paint our town. And he said, what? And I said, I'm going to paint Maquoketa. And he's like, what are we going to do with a bunch of paintings of Maquoketans? And I'm like, no, Dad, this is a really good idea. I totally am going to do this. Ask some of your friends. Ask some of your friends and see if they'd be willing to pose. All right? And so my parents, I said, just don't think about this too much. Just go and see if your friends would be willing to try this. If I just let them come in and do it. And my dad and mom went to some dinner party or some supper, sort of, kind of a collective Iowa kind of, what do you call it? You can say it. Potluck. Thank you. I mean, because Ian is an expert on Iowa now. His wife's from Okoboji.
I'm on a learning curve.
You're on a learning curve. Anyway, and my parents went and asked some of their friends, and half of their friends said no way, they'd never do it. So I immediately cut down to 3,000. And then I started getting a little bit smart, and I thought, logistically, okay, so it's going to be kind of hard to get 3,000 people, and so let's say I'll probably be able to do 2,000 portraits. So I cut it down. I said a third of the people will never show up, so I'll just do 2,000. And so I'm like, okay, how am I going to pull that off? And one of my friends called me up, and I said, I got my idea for the social documentary. She was in the show with me, and I said, I'm going to paint the portrait of people in Maquoketa. She's like, you should write a grant for that. The grant was due 2 days later. All right, April 1st, you can get a grant from the state of Iowa. They're way into helping people like do some of these projects. And so we got the paperwork off the internet. And that is another thing you should underline. Because when we opened this up to getting some grant funding, the grant was another organizing principle for the project. And they had questions, and I had to really think in 2 days about what I really wanted to do with this project. If this was going to be some sort of social commentary, and this is like, and that's a wonderful thing about a governmental institution. That, I mean, here they want to find ways of supporting art and keeping art in Iowa, and reading that grant sort of helped me realize that, how is this really going to be a contribution to my community? How am I going to engage people? How am I going to become interactive? And that orienting principle had me realize that I should do this downtown in a storefront on Main Street in a town that was dying. Our town, I shouldn't probably say that because this might go on the internet, but It's hard, you know, it's hard being out there in the middle of nowhere. And, you know, you can look around and the most of the population of my town is above 55. I mean, and so it's kind of rough and harder to live out there, even though now we can live anywhere, which is why we live out there with the internet and all those connections. But for some reason, these small towns they're losing what I think was their harmonizing factors. And so we said that I think that year when we started this, when I got this idea, I think that maybe 7 storefronts on Main Street closed. And now, even from when Brandon came to Iowa in 2008, we've lost the pharmacy, the grocery store, or even almost all the businesses, and then a quarter of our town burned down in a fire in 2008. So it's even worse than when I started the project. It's even more gone. So, but we thought, let's put it on Main Street. Let's open it to the public. Let's have anybody come in and watch somebody in the town get painted. So I had a storefront on, so this is part of this grant. Writing this grant, I was like, yes, that's what we'll do. I rented a building. I took it away from my gallery because I didn't want this to feel commercial at all. I wanted people to feel like they could own this project. And I had the door open, and we posted some signs on the door. And I think my dad went into the restaurants on either side and said, hey, you know, my daughter's going to be painting portraits over there. You should go get your portrait painted. And they're like, what? Yeah, go ahead. Sure.
I'm sorry, but did you tell people up front like how long it might take?
Yes.
And one other question I can't
yes.
to ask you. Do you have they look so real, the spirit just really comes out. I'm so in love with this work.
Oh, that's nice.
And my son loves straw faces. And
oh,
so I just had to
great life, drawing faces.
and he does it, he's got them all over his wall.
Oh,
so,
you do, man.
Do you talk to your people as you're painting?
Yes.
You do. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so you're engaged with them.
Totally got engaged with them. So I did the storefront, and
told them that would take a certain amount of time.
I wrote like 4 hours.
Okay.
And it got a little longer instead of shorter as the project went on. It moved to 4 or 5 hours. And then if you wanted to smile and show your teeth, I would tell them it'll take 7 hours to paint that portrait. I'm telling you, teeth are like way harder in 5. I mean, so all these decisions, everything that's painted in here is like done in just 4 or 5 hours. And like the first 70, because we needed them for this show at that museum, they were done in 6 weeks. 6 weeks, I did 2 a day. And I clocked at 4 hours, I stopped. Wherever the painting was, that was it. And then I would let them, yeah, this is good. Is this okay?
Shorter. I thought maybe down to an hour.
Yeah, I thought I would get shorter, but here's the thing. Remember I said underline this part about the engagement with the people talking to me? When people started telling me their stories and telling me about their lives, the whole project took on a whole other meaning and force. And it was that part when my models say that when they pose for me, they feel like, and I feel it too, these moments. What's your son's name? Russell. It's a great life. Grew up and be an artist. Okay? It's a great life. Okay? I can't even tell you. Okay? Every once in a while, you know, you experience these moments of, I'll say this, transcendence. Okay? Because they're holding still, and you're looking eye to eye into each other, and you're like engaged. And you become, and something happens in that exchange. And that my models had told me, I have felt it. You know, I would feel that with them. And so like, can you bring that to the community? And that started happening. What?
So you have that gift. Not all artists who do portraits have that ability, I think.
Well, that's...
You've got them eye to eye.
Well, let's say this. That's very nice. Thank you. I have this aim. Okay, as a human being making paintings, I want to have a real experience, right? I want to feel connected with the person I'm painting with. I want to get to know them. I want them to get to know me, and maybe that's partly why that happens. Okay, but I also do everything from life. So people were sitting there. And they're telling me about their lives. And so these opportunities happen when you're sitting in a 5-hour bubble, 2 people, you know, turning and melding your lives, looking at each other. I had some of these men in this project said they had not even looked in their wife's eyes that many hours in a row. And they would say, that, and that, you know, was so funny because when I got this idea, I just didn't think about the people. You know what I mean? I mean, you're just like, as an artist, you're always sort of struggling, like, okay, I'm gonna make my stamp, okay? And that's like the first thing you have to give up in something like this. Making your stamp, making your claim. Like I had to give up my artistic aspirations for this project because I wanted to have these people in strange lighting. I wanted to do them black and white. I wanted to do them in color. I wanted to do, you know, this, that, all these things. And I had the first couple people in, I saw that they couldn't hold the pose. One person had her neck like this, and she was like crying almost. And I'm like, oh man, I can't do that to anybody else because she was only 49, all right? You know what I mean? So, and she's like, and this was a very lovely, happy woman, and she was a little bit miserable posing. So I'm like, oh my God, people can't do this. People can't pose. And I didn't think about that because I worked so much with professional models that this was the first time I was painting. I mean, maybe not the first time, but this is the first time I was actually asking people who had never had experience like this before to come sit and hang out with me. Another interesting thing, right? What happens, so this is the Midwest, right? This is Iowa. And in Iowa, people kind of, they're open and they're friendly, but they don't like to do things to make themselves stand out. Which is why I think when my parents said that the first 3,000 people, like when I cut that down from 6,000 to 3,000, because their friends say, no, I don't want to stand out. I don't want people to see me. No, never do it. Never, ever do it, right? And that's in us. It's sort of a little bit of a Midwestern kind of thing. And so that's a little bit in this project too. If you look at it, but something about these people were willing to try something very new, which is really interesting to me about this group. So remember, this is a self-selected group. Yeah. Any more questions? Because I'm kind of doing a narrative, but not. Yeah.
Well, more about the actual aspect of the paintings. What was it that made you choose the backgrounds that you did, and also the surface that you worked on? Was that just a smooth panel or canvas?
So I went with, the first decision I made was, am I going to do this on canvas? Am I going to do it on panel? And I opted for panel because you wouldn't have to worry about them getting damaged as much. Like if you have canvases poking in that. And when I wrote this grant, there's so many different aspects that the grant helped me. I saw the storefront with all these blank panels. And every day, this is how I visualize it. But you know, what you see in your head as an artist and how things grow, they're always like, I'm really great in my head. You know what I mean? But in reality, it's like, oh, I'm always put on my knees, right, and humbled. But I wanted to see the storefront with all these panels, and then I would just put a new person up, you know, a person up every day, and have this whole place be transformed into a space of portraits. So I thought panels will do that, all right? I also, as I told you, I was doing this old master glazing technique, and that's really thin paint, layers and layers and layers of thin paint. And you know, a la prima guys, so like thick, fat, juicy brushstrokes and stuff like that. And I wasn't really painting very thick, you know, when I would try it. And I thought, you know, if you paint on a panel and it's a slick surface, the brushstrokes show a little bit more. So you get a little bit of that a la prima look without, even if you don't quite have that much juice in your brush. So that was another thing I knew. And the other thing, what? Go ahead.
And no framing costs.
And no framing costs. Well, you know, we actually did. We have all kinds of different ideas on how to do them, how to frame. But that was the other thing. And then I thought, you know, with this, remember the first show that they went into was this warehouse. I was like, you could build anything with them. So I was dreaming like building furniture with the portraits, and I thought, oh, nobody will want to sit on a face, right? Brandon, I'm totally improper. Is that okay? Is it okay? Okay. They don't let me out of Iowa very often. Anyway, but I did actually see that at one point. And the first time we showed him on pillars, and this is some little corny idea, and I'm way into corn too, but Katrina just happened. In 2005 was the first time I showed the first 70. And we were in this old warehouse, and I was thinking about how these people, even people who weren't, but they became kind of pillars of our community. You know, this project was a mix of some of the most prominent forming people in our town and some of the most lost and confused people in our town. And so I put them all on these pillars. That was the first way they were arranged. And they were like, these pillars were perfect. They all fit like 12 by 12s, and I surrounded them with the first 70 portraits. Just sort of, it was a silly metaphor, but you know, he tried different things. Or I thought, you know, a big grid or a big arc or these things. So I thought on a panel, you could do a lot of different things. You're pretty open, where if you had canvases, you had to worry about the backs and all those things. So that was another reason why I chose panels. And then yep. Oh, okay. Last thing. Here's a funny story. When I did this, I worked on a medium. When you do a panel, you paint you gesso a panel. There's a lot of different ways to gesso a panel, and I do all different techniques because of all the different things I do. I make my frames. I do the glazing technique. But I heard about this product from Gamblin called Oil Ground. Excuse me, Gamblin Oil Ground. And so I made 80 panels right off the bat before we had anybody signed up. And they take there's a 24-hour, first you coat them all, and that was hours. So that part isn't even factored into this project. All the hours I spent making these panels, and I had to figure out how to lay this ground down and scrape it so it would be really slick. You had to coat all the edges so the wood wouldn't deteriorate. And I made the 80 panels. I went to do my first portrait, which was my brother, and I put my first brushstroke down, and it slid right off. And I'm like, oh my God, what the? That was so slick. The brush wouldn't even grab, right? And so I'm like, oh my God, what the hell am I gonna do? I got people coming tomorrow, next day. And so what I did was I sanded it. And it was just gritty enough for the paint to, like, my brush to hold it, and it was lovely. And it was perfect. So this is the first time I ever used this Gamblin oil painting ground, but now I use it all the time. And there was like 3 layers. And so in between each layer, you had to let it dry for 24 hours to cure. And then you have to, you didn't sand. Yeah. I don't sand in between the layers. And then on after the third day, third coat, you let it dry for a week. It has to cure before you could paint on it. So all these panels had to be done. And then so throughout the project, if you came into our house, because at that point we were living in the studio, and you would come and you might have like 20, 30, 40 panels that you had to walk around in the house, and they were drying and curing, you know. But so is that good?
Yeah. Quick technical question.
Sure.
Somewhat more involved one. That technical question, you mentioned these are panels. What exactly is the panel? It's not masonite.
Some of them are masonite because we were trying different things. So the first 80 were birch panels, and I had to sand all those panels too, and then put the oil ground on. And I went to masonite because I thought, ooh, I could go what? MDF. Okay, MDF or MDO, but MDF half-inch panels. And so then I tried MDF for a while, but when you do MDF, there's this like edge that has a little bit of fuzz stuff, and so that was really hard to coat the sides with. I mean, it's amazing how much time it took me but I'm good now. I'm really fast. After 100, yeah.
How did you get from 3,000 down to 180?
That's a great question. Well, so my parents told me, you know, I told you, then I went down to 2,000, and then we wrote the grant. In the grant, I wrote, maybe we'd do 700, okay? And my oldest brother lives in Europe. I'm one of 6 kids. And my oldest brother, I'm glad you asked this, he said, he's a businessman. I have a brother that's an opera singer. I have a brother that's a composer. My sister's a social worker. And then my youngest brother's a Green Beret medic, okay? But my oldest brother's a businessman. And he's sitting there, and I'm telling him about this project.
And you're the only girl?
No, I'm 2 girls and 4 boys, all right? And my oldest brother says, Rose, do you realize that doing 700 portraits, you're going to be painting portraits for 4 or 5 years? And I'm like, what? And he's like, did you ever think about doing the math? And I'm like, oh, no. Right? Because we'd already written the grant to do that many. And I was like, I can't do that for years. And he's like, yeah. So I was like, okay, reconsider, set it for a year. And the grant was interesting because it was relatively open. And I feel like actually, the way I wrote the grant, even though I said I had this dream of doing 700, and I said it might take me 2 or 3 years to do it, they didn't give me the full amount that I needed. In fact, the project cost me, do you want to hear financial stuff? The project cost me 4 times what the grant was financially. It was a lot more expensive. But I saved a little money. I had a little money saved, so we used that to survive. And plus, in this year that I wound up let me back up for a second. By January of 2006, I started painting in July of 2005. By January 2006, I already felt like it fulfilled my grant obligations. And so the next 6 months were just because the project had taken on its own life. And people were really starting to become engaged, and I didn't want to stop, right? And it was becoming utterly fascinating for me as a human being, sitting and talking with people and engaging with them. So, yeah.
At that point, did you seek out other funding sources or just use your own?
I just used my own money. So I did the first 70, and then I took 2 months off, and I did a few paintings, did some things, moved my arm a little bit differently than just on this 12 by 12, and did a couple things, and then a couple of those sold, and then we made it through the year, just on savings and on that, and every month that I did this project, I took a week off and just sort of went. I flew to New York. I hung out with some friends, thought a lot of bit, oriented myself, and then came back and did another bunch of portraits. So I didn't do the 180 in a year. I actually did it in about 8 months. And so that's why it was like 5 or 6 days a week. And another thing, just technically, about physically what happened to me. Now, what you're not seeing is because painting sort of becomes a static impression in a way. With what I bring to the painting could make it have life, and the receiver, the viewer of the painting, gives it life and adds something to it. But it's a static impression. But the person that I'm making this of is not static, and neither am I. And the whole thing is happening in the moment. These people were not posing. People were telling me their stories. And so this is all to tell you about what was happening to me physically. People were telling me their stories and telling me about their lives, and I'm trying to figure, well, where's the eye go? Where's the nose go? And I'm like, and all the time I'm trying to talk to them about what was happening all the time, and like what they're talking about. It's like, I was telling somebody yesterday, I painted him right there for a demo in front of these a bunch of portrait artists. There's a group right now in the city. It's like the Portrait Society of America is having their national conference, and so I painted him yesterday. That's why we're still in the engagement. But yesterday he and I talked while we did the portrait. It was only an hour and a half. And some of the people said, hey, was that what it was like when you did the project with the people? I said, yeah, except for we didn't talk about art. We talked about, DeWalt sponsoring cars in the Indy 500, Indianapolis 500. Or we talked about whatever. And that was interesting because that was something that was one thing I was really grateful for being 40. That I don't think I could have had those conversations with people when I was in my 30s or even in my 20s. I don't think I could have navigated all these places. So let's say I had an 80-year-old woman in front of me, or 82-year-old man, I had the oldest person was 99 3/4, and the youngest person was 4 days. Actually, the mom says it was 3 days, but I remember at the time 4 days, but I should probably believe the mother, right? So the youngest, so I had this whole age range, and so, I'm seeing that there's a really good way to tell the story. Which way should I say it? Let me say the big picture, and then I'll go back to an individual story about this. I'm seeing that people are really opening up and willing to tell me about themselves, and I'm a human being on the planet trying to learn how to live better and more fully. And so I have an 80-year-old woman in front of me. I was trying to find a way to ask these people questions about life. And even if they didn't share the same kind of life that I did, this arc of an artist or whatever, or the third child of my parents, they didn't have that same thing, but I was like, hey, tell me what you know about living. you know, and it was an awesome experience. So at 40, I could even ask that, not just about Indianapolis cards. I had real questions about what do you know? What can you tell me? And in knowing full well, also being 40, that they weren't going to save me any of the pains and trials and tribulations that I was going to have, but they would just tell me that it was possible to live through some of them, and that there was actually a joy and a way to celebrate even all the changes and everything that I was experiencing in myself. And I would gather that stuff and take it to heart. Like I had this 92-year-old guy came into my studio, and he said, this is a funny thing. He said, the only thing 92 on me are my knees. And he was absolutely right. His mind was like a 25-year-old. This guy was brought in a book about religion, and he wanted to talk all about Christianity and he had been a minister for 60 years. He's like, I'm rethinking Christianity totally at 92. And I'm like, oh man, I love you. Can you just hurry up and become 42 again? No, not because I loved him to marry him, but I just wanted him, I just wanted him to be like alive forever because he had so much. He was like so alive and had all these things to teach me, and it was amazing and fascinating. Yeah.
Did the people of Maquoketa become so excited ultimately by this that they want to come in and sit and watch you work? Were you honest?
I had some people, so remember I told you I rented a storefront, and what I dreamed of and when I wrote the grant was, can it be like a public park? Can people come in and just hang out and watch me do the portraits? And can we make it feel like this is their place? A gathering place. And you know what? We had multiple people it happened with multiple people. I mean, there was one guy who was going through a pretty painful divorce. He came in over 40 nights and watched and just hung out. And it was like a way of sort of separating himself from all the pain. And some nights I get a couple of us women, maybe some of the women in their 50s and me, and we got this young guy who's like 35 or something, like teaching him. Like, come on. How to navigate divorce, right? But we have these really awesome experiences.
So it was transcendent for them too.
Yes, I think so. I think a few people would say that. Now, I can't say that it had a great stickiness factor, but I think that as a human being and as an artist, what I could hope, and even if I look at this for myself, right? How many, do I have a moment that actually changes me forever, or does it change me for an hour, or does it open me up toward the next moment? And I sort of feel like that all I did was contribute a little bit in the, it's possible for us to live a little bit more vividly now, right? In this moment. And so my thought was that if some of the Maquoketans had a chance to see or experience that was the best we could do. Now, whether that moved on into their lives further, I don't know. That's out of my control. Just like this project was out of my control. Just like who came in and what happened between me and them I didn't know. Like, only thing I knew each day was how old they were and what sex they were. I think I knew maybe 10 people in this project well enough. And I said this, remember what I said when I did that talk with my brother? I think I knew 4 people well enough to brush my teeth in front of them. I don't know how that went over. but it was like, yeah, it's a good one, right? But there's like 4 people, and that's my mom, my dad, my brother, and my husband. Okay, and everybody else I knew a few of them a little bit, but almost everybody else I discovered that day in that moment, in those 5 hours that we were together.
How would they know about the project? Would they just go passing by and seeing the signs or
Well, we rented a storefront right in the middle of the 2 still remaining restaurants on Main Street, in the heart of Main Street, and that was just a really good fortune. So the first group of people that came in were patrons of the restaurant. And I mean, well, actually the first person was the very first person outside of Chuck, my mom, and my brother, because I hadn't done any of that fast painting. I was like, how am I I better practice on some people I know, some people I can mess up in front of. So I had those guys, right? Can I even do this? I didn't even know when I did it. I didn't even know if I could really do it. What? That was neat about it. Yeah, it was. Yeah, and who knows if I did it, right? And it's still a question up there in the ethers. But I, the first woman I painted was the grocery clerk. because I was standing in the grocery line, another grocery store, which is also gone now because we built a super Walmart. But that grocery store crook, I said, hey, come in and have your portrait painted. And she came in, and she was completely sunburnt.
Oh.
And I'm like, I wasn't expecting this, right? And so that was a really interesting thing because all the stuff that I wanted to paint, all these things that I like to paint was taken away from me. My choice about who you are, what you look like, all that stuff was removed. And every day I had to be ready for whatever, whomever, however they showed up.
So basically they just walk through the door.
They walk through the door.
Walk through the door and commit for that amount of time.
That's right. And so let's say, so now I do her. At night, I did it in the day, I did her in the day, and I put her painting on the easel in the window. And then people went by and said, hey, what's that? And then there's that little sign, you can be painted too, portrait, have Rose Frantzen, blah, blah, blah. This is a small town, they know a little bit that there's this crazy, I'm always walking around in my messy painting clothes, so everybody's wondering who the hell that crazy, dirty, like little kids at the grocery store they'll say, Mom, why is that lady so dirty? Okay. I've heard that. And so now we are giving them an opportunity to come and meet the dirty lady. but go ahead.
Did any of your people want to buy the paintings, or was that like not part of the equation?
Everybody who posed, I gave them an archival giclée print. And that was another thing that we posted on the wall. So that took us actually another 6 months because Chuck and I learned how to make them, and we spent 6 months trying to figure out how to put them in the computer. So that was a 6-month period that nobody knows about. That was what I did between 2006 and 2007. 6 more months of not painting anything. Yeah.
4 to 5 hours is a long time. I have where everybody was able to finish the 4 hours?
Everybody except for little kids. But I had a little rule that even if you were a little kid, you had to stay in the room with me. And staying in the room with me, it was a big, huge storefront. And it was longer than, I think it was just about 3 of these galleries long. And staying in the room with me might be me and the 4-year-old going like this. Now do it on 2 legs, right? I'm playing games, singing songs, doing ABCs, figuring out what this 4-year-old can do, what that 4-year-old can do, what they're interested in, what 2-year-olds. I get this 2-year-old girl, I don't know where her portrait is. But she came in, first half hour, she's just like, she really wanted to be painted. Her mom totally worked her into it. And actually, her mom wound up posing for me. And her mom even came with her little sister. That's the pink baby across the street. Across the street. Listen. And in Iowa, you say crossed the street. You don't say across, you say across. You always add a T at the end of the, and Chuck taught me not to say that anymore, so I could go out in public. But anyway, that baby there, the yellow of that is the mom's arm. And she held that baby, after she fed it, and she held that baby for 4 hours, just like that while it slept. Yeah, for me to do it. But this little girl, she sat perfectly for like 25 minutes. And I did everything I could do in 25 minutes, and then I took a photograph. With just the little kids, I took a photograph just as an anchor for the drawing. But then I had them stay there with the mom or in the chair. Like you can get a 5-year-old to do it for you. But you have to talk to them. You have to find a way to do the song. Like, here's an interesting story. There was a 4-year-old that came in, and you see, I'm telling you that there are a lot of things about this project that were out of my control. And this 4-year-old could hardly speak, and it was his grandmother that brought him in. And I'm like, wow, he doesn't, I'm this all in my head. He doesn't really speak that well, blah, 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 this kind of stuff. And the grandmother tells me, well, see, his parents are separated or divorced or something, and they keep stealing him from each other. Oh. And so we haven't seen him for like 5 months. The father had custody. This was the paternal grandmother. And when the mom has him, she doesn't feed him well. So he has a really bad deficiency, and his speaking isn't up to par yet. And I'm like, so how do you work with a kid like that? And what we did, because I was used to, most 4-year-olds can do, ABCs. They have these loving they have these parents, and they come in, they're ready to do all this stuff. With this kid, we totally created a world together. And it was like, so I'm a whale. And then he would add something to it, and then I would add something to it. And that's how I got him to stay. And another trick I did with kids, And this is a really funny one because this is where you learn that you kind of follow your own rules, and it's a little goofy because you forget your ultimate aim. But I would take a kid. Let's see if I got one here. This one here, she sang the theme song from the Phantom of the Opera. Wow. Honest to God, with the vibrato in her voice. Right? My brother's an opera singer. I mean, and my sister-in-law actually was Christine in the Phantom of the Opera in Hamburg, Germany. Wow. So I knew it. And there's this little kid. She's coming in and singing. And it was like she was singing away. And I'm like, man, you're you know? And then, but by the end of the day, okay, she was holding a pillow up in front of her face because she was tired of me looking at her. Yeah. So we started out like that, you know. And, but so when I had a little kid, one of the things I would tell him is, hey, like this guy right here, I say, can you tell what I'm looking at right now? Ooh, yeah, but if you get really quiet and really still, I'm going to stare at it. Because some of my models tell me when I stare at parts of their face or their body, it itches. What? You hit it! You just itched it! And so I would do this, right? And so while I'm trying to stare at this one part of their face, and this really worked with kid after kid after kid, right? Because then they had to get really still and sort of see where is it itching? Where's it itching? And I would know where I was looking, right? And they say right there, and I say, no, you're guessing. You're totally guessing. And so no, you got to get quieter. You got to get stiller. And that would be how I got them to do that. But the funny thing is, I wouldn't quit staring at that part. So I was trying to paint the ear over here, where the eyebrow is, and I'm staring at that one section of their cheek, and I'm like not getting the information I was doing it for in the first place. So I was like, I was getting caught in my own game. It's like, you know, go ahead.
How did you decide to arrange these? Was there any science in who went next?
This, I think this was Brandon, right? Did you arrange it or?
Our Office of Design and Exhibitions.
They decided. Yeah. When we designed it, when we were just trying to do male, female, mix up ages, mix up sex and stuff, so it would look, you would see that it was such a variety. That was the thing. Yeah, go ahead.
Did you get standing or seating?
They were all sat. I sat too.
You sat too.
Now, I tried a couple standing. I tried to paint a couple people standing, and it didn't allow that kind of dynamic in the conversation to happen. It was like I was moving back. They were getting dizzy sick because I stepped back a lot. And I noticed that when I sat down, it became more of a togetherness. And so I restricted myself. But the other thing I did during this project was I had a mirror set up right about this far behind me. And so my canvas is here, the mirror's here, and the person is about this close. Sometimes I could reach out if they were really being a really bad model, I'd hit him. No, I'm teasing. Yeah, no, only two people fell asleep. Well, actually 3, because there was one woman I painted in the nursing home, and she was the 99 3/4, and she fell asleep. And then a woman who works really hard and gets up at 5 o'clock in the morning and thought she could sit at night, she fell asleep. And I'm like, you should have never sat at night for me. You're a day person. I didn't know I would fall asleep, Rose. And I'm like, okay. So that was another person. And then there was another guy that kind of fell asleep. But we got a lot of painting done. Oh, no, there was another. I'm starting to remember them all. Yeah, go ahead.
I just wanted to ask you, what type of work does your husband do, and what was his role in that?
Great question. My husband is a portrait painter too. In fact, we kind of met over the, I'm not really a portrait painter. I kind of paint people. And painting, wait, I know this, but that's not really kind of the same thing, right? Listen to her laugh. But I sort of paint, a lot of times I paint people doing things or in natural settings, or I paint people in sort of ideas and allegorical kind of settings. But Chuck actually made a living for 25 years as a portrait painter. But he primarily does these utterly exquisite, sort of similar, except for not like Jim Torok's work. Chuck will do the very, very fine, detailed stuff, stylized differently from Jim's. They both sort of orient things a little bit towards what they're themselves. And he would come in. This is such a great question. So I'm with this person. We're about 3 hours in. Chuck came in on every painting session at about 3 hours into it and said, Rose, you know, this is wrong, or that's wrong, all right? It was funny too, because I loved it. Because you have to think about where I am. I'm in the middle of somebody's story, and I'm just like Hail Marying this thing. Can I please pull this off, right? I mean, I'm just trying to find my way in this. And I left the painting kind of like, some people left it sort of parts of it loose and stuff, not determined, until I sort of built on correct, like determined things. So there was always sections that I hadn't even given very much attention to. Chuck could come in, he was clean, pure, right? Could just see who I was looking at, what I was doing, and the models always sat a little bit better while Chuck's there, because Chuck's quiet, strong, has this sort of way of walking into a room that made people. and so I'm like, I would look at him, and if he was like really critical, I think 2 times in the entire 180, Chuck was like saying, you know, you got to get that, and you got to get that, and I looked at him like begging him, please, man, do you realize this person hasn't sat still the entire time? Don't be so hard on me. Only twice I kind of begged him to leave me alone a little bit. I was doing the best I could. But most of the time, he reoriented me back into the visual language of painting. And they sat a little bit better maybe for the next 20 minutes. And sometimes that was the best work I did. I mean, that was the way to actually start to pull the painting together. Because really, I'm discovering people. And I'm like, what happened? Let me tell you the story that I was going to say. When it moved from being about painting to being about people, I was painting maybe my 12th person. And this woman came in. It was an afternoon painting. So I either did from like 1 till 4 or 1 till 5, and then from 6 till 10 or 5:30 to 9:30, right? And then a little longer if later on as the project moved on. And this woman came in. She was somewhat handicapped. She's got a crippling birth defect, okay? But that wasn't very much about her. But she kind of waddled in, came in, sat down, and I started meeting her, right? We have this painting. We're meeting each other, and she started telling me about her life. And she had married, tried to have children, had miscarriages, and she and her husband took on some foster children, took on a foster child, and when she was, this is her story, and they took on a foster child, and she's okay with me telling her story, that's why I can tell it, and one day, the last day of her foster child last day of kindergarten for her child, she and the husband and the child went on the river in Maquoketa, and they both drowned. Okay, so I think she was like 30 years old, and she lost her like world, and she's telling me about this, and I'm like, holy cow, right? And it was sort of, I said, man, I was not expecting this. And then she continued to tell me more about her life and how she wound up, how she was a really joyous person. And I was teasing her while she was posing, because she was posing like she was 2.5-year-old. She laughed and she was giddy. And she says, because I love children. And what she did after that was she became the town's babysitter. She babysat for all these different families. And she was like this person that everybody in town could rely on. And that's how she found her way, and that's how she healed. And so she was telling me all this stuff. And I think she didn't know what she was getting into, because she saw this project from the restaurant. And in fact, it was her portrait that helped me get a whole bunch of more people that I didn't expect to get into the project, right? I didn't know who was going to come in and sign up. But anyway, she tells me this, but while she was posing, she had a friend come in at some point in the day. And I think, when you think about people who never had this experience before, maybe she said, hey, you come in and make sure everything's cool, right? Well, her friend came in and sat there, and she had already told me this part of her story, and we were really, really connecting. And it was awesome. And her friend came in, and the whole dynamic changed. And all of a sudden, we went from 2 to 3, and then the conversation shifted, and it was not this same intensity. And her friend said, hey, I got to go to the bathroom. So she went back to the bathroom, and this lady said, oh, I want her to leave. And I was like, oh, because I hadn't realized that this attention that I was giving her, that this conversation was so meaningful to her. So I figured out a way, while I'm painting, to gently figure out a way to have the friend leave, right? And so we had the friend leave, and then she and I went back to our day. And that's when I realized that the attention, that the people and I, this engagement was fundamental to the project. And that's when the art, like the physical painting part of it, what I wanted as an artist, I let it go. I decided that what I needed, what this was really about was the experience. And how can I be more present to each person? How can I open up this dialogue? How can we share? And what is needed? And part of me realized during that what's needed is I have to share too. And we both have to give in the conversation. And that changed the entire project. And it changed the project, yeah?
So essentially a communal experience.
Yeah. Yes, go ahead.
Can you tell us more about the paint, the process itself? What do you mix it with? Like what kind of brushes, how big they are?
Yes, I can. I use, I didn't use any medium. Medium is like are you a painter? This was all done with mineral spirits, odorless paint thinner, okay? So it's just somewhat thinned down first strokes. We did a little book for this project, and I think you can get it up in the bookstore. But in that book, you can see the painting photographed every 7 minutes. So you can actually see how I approach. We did Chuck came by and photographed me painting people throughout an entire day, just to sort of show people. We didn't think about this until near the end of the project. The last 2 paintings we photographed, right? But so I started with this transparent kind of quick lay-in, and then I actually really pretty much started with the forehead, using ox hair brushes and sable brushes, a red sable. And you want the brands? Okay. Last one? Okay. I mean, you can quit recording, and I can keep talking. That's all I do.
Thank you all for coming. If anybody wants another dose of art and conversation, next Saturday, 3 successful entrants to the Outland Blue Cheever Portrait Competition will be presenting up in that space next Saturday at 2 o'clock.
Nice.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Okay. Thanks.